Hi, and thank you for watching. My name is Dr. Anton Babushkin. I'm the CEO of Wellness Psychotherapy. This week, we're going to cover a new topic having to do with the coronavirus. If you watched our video from the week before, we covered a topic that's relevant, I think, for everybody at this time. Taking care of yourself, stopping to take time for your own needs, and knowing that that kind of limit setting is not a weakness or an abdication of one's responsibilities. It's a necessary thing that we all need, even during a very stressful pandemic. This week, we're going to go on to another topic in my conversation with Dr. Rama, which has to do with finding good role models and knowing who to turn to. A lot of times, the role models in our lives, for example, a hospital administrator, sets the tone for what's normal or what's okay. And we need to have trusted colleagues we can come to talk and ask for help in a non-judgmental manner. I hope you enjoyed this conversation and that it's useful for you. And at the end, we're going to do a short recap of today's discussion and talk about how, as a member of the Wayne County Medical Society, your first session with a therapist is free. So hope you enjoyed the video.
I know, for us in our department, we're in a situation now where some of our junior colleagues, like our trainees, are starting to have to go and jump into roles that they're not really accustomed to, especially like our resident staff.
For sure.
And I think if you're a supervisor, and I know this for myself, it's like you can take on something of a parenting role in a way, where you're trying to guide this trainee to become the best physician they can be.
Yeah.
And it's scary to send people. So the example I come up with, or I think of, is concerns, and I know some of the psychiatry department trainees who are, they're excellent, all around physicians, but their expertise is not in the ICU and it's not in the ER. And so I get afraid when I hear that my trainees are going to be in an unfamiliar environment doing, very dangerous work, and they are less autonomous than me. I'm a private practice physician, so I can say no to what I want to say no to, but they are hospital staff. And so it becomes this concern, like we were saying before, about risk to ourselves, risk to family, but then also like risk to colleagues. And if you're at a university affiliation, our students and our trainees. And I can imagine this happening, is sometimes I think we even encourage the people who are like equally vulnerable, but we would tell them things that we would do for ourselves. It's like, I found myself telling the residents, like, make sure that, don't do stuff that doesn't feel right, say no, like if the mask stuff is not up to speed, like don't do it. Meanwhile, it's like, a lot of us will still just throw ourselves in front of the problem, if the PPE is, up to snuff or not. But you can find yourself in these kind of weird arguments. Yeah.
I think you're totally right, but I think there's a big difference between somebody who is someone more experienced like you, who's been there and who's been a physician for a long time. I think your judgment call might be more. I think you're someone more prepared, right? Because I think when you're younger in the profession, you have other considerations. I want to impress people or live up to some kind of ideal example. You know what I mean? I think you're not that the physicians are any less talented or any less smart, but they don't have that sort of any life experience to sort of balance it off of, right? They're kind of like, this is like their first time going into some kind of difficult situation. So I think that makes a lot of sense. You're looking out for them and you're sort of maybe babying them, so to speak. But I think you're saying something that we should all be keeping in mind. Like, okay, what kind of risks am I willing to take, and when does it make sense, right? Because sometimes you're not always prepared for everything. But I think a younger colleague, they're more likely to maybe not know how to look out for themselves and not even have that as a, it's not like you take a class in school that says, okay, how do I take time for me? How do I think about my own needs? How do I make it? You know what I mean? That's not.
When I have done those things, I don't even listen to that. When I was a student, I'd be like, oh, it's fine. Like, I'll just figure it out. Like, it'll be okay. And then meanwhile, now I'm like, no, you guys, like, take care of yourself. So totally. I agree.
Because it is a really interesting balance. On the one hand, as people, we're always taking risks to try to get things done or kind of achieve some kind of goal. But be able to stop and really think like, okay, when does the risk make sense? Or when do I need to stop and
Yeah.
ask for help? Or, if we don't have the right equipment, what are my other options? I mean, there's a lot of like news stories, right, about creative things that people are doing. I mean, it's sort of like a desperate thing, but they're sort of doing creative solutions to try to. There's people who are helping import masks from like other countries.
Right.
There's,
Yeah.
people are making their own like protective equipment. I mean, it's a
We have like
very
sewing groups in Madison. Like there are like sewing groups that are making masks and they're like all
right.
decorated and cool. Yeah.
I mean, I think when I was thinking about these, medical providers, the biggest
Yeah.
thing to me was sort of thinking about, do they have enough space in their lives where they can feel actually heard and listened to? You know what I mean? Like, I think as therapists, I think that's one of the biggest things that I mean, we have a lot to offer, but I think one of the things that's sort of maybe not conveyed as much as it's sort of like a unique environment where you feel like somebody's actually taking seriously what you have to say. They're
Yeah.
trying to consider your perspective and how not just the objective view of that situation, but like how did you experience it? You know what I mean? That's I think a unique thing that we all need somebody to kind of appreciate what was it like for you at this
Yeah.
time. So you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and I think the other part of it is like in addition to being heard, it's to being heard without judgment,
Hmm.
because like we were saying about the strong feelings that can come out,
Right.
um, issues of like it's we're in a kind of like militaristic mode right now with the people who are in our ERs and ICUs, and I would say the same thing to military personnel, where you're like
Hmm.
it's hard to express like systemic rage that you might have, which is understandable, and then similarly fear of like I'm not sure if I want to do this because I'm not sure what's going to happen to me, and then having to tolerate, to not be judged for the way that you manage your duty and view your own limits. And so in that way, I think as much as people can, if there are like trusted supervisors or mentors in your own department, somebody who's like a sympathetic ear, but somebody who can tolerate
Sure.
um, difficult feelings. I think that's always a go-to person. Um, the physician helplines, like we were talking about before, it seems like there's some on the national level, and then there's some that are local, and then of course like friends and family. But I think that the friends and family stuff just seems like it can get tough because in a lot of ways they're all sewn into the fabric of your life, and that can be difficult because they're under stress too.
Right, and they're probably going to be, if you're telling them about all the things that are happening during your
Yeah.
day, you might be worried about scaring them, or they might be,
Yeah.
concerned about you. And so, how would they? It'd probably be hard for them to kind of hear all that, maybe, because it's so much to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
But I think you're right. I mean, I think the leadership in terms of like the hospital administrators are probably playing such a key role in terms of trying to be both realistic about what needs to be done, but also reassuring or supportive, or sort of like you said, maybe not exactly a parent, but kind of
Yeah.
a helpful other role when they can,
Yeah.
somebody could turn to them and say, "Wow, I had a really tough day," or "I dealt with all this." You know what I mean? Somebody they could turn to who knows the environment. That probably would be
Sure.
such a crucial help.
Yeah. Somebody who can tolerate the fact that I'm really afraid. you know,
For sure, for sure.
I'm really worried, and I don't know what's going to happen. And I wonder and worry if we have enough of that going on in our hospitals, like because this struck us all so quickly, and
Mhm.
it's like this would be a monumental task, and I'm not sure if people give themselves enough credit. Like the volume of emergency care and intensive care unit care that's going on now, this would be hard to mount if you had like a year's lead time. Like,
For sure.
you know what I mean? Like people have already moved mountains, and I think that what's so hard about it is because in different parts of the country and different areas, we may or may not be reaching a point where we're hitting the apex of the curve. But oh
Hmm.
my gosh, I mean, the things that have been achieved in the last couple of months they would be stretched out over a year plus, and yet we did it so quick. And
Yeah,
I
it's
really shouldn't
incredible.
even say we. I should say people who are actually in the emergency departments doing this stuff. Um, it's very different to be an outpatient
For sure.
practitioner. Yeah.
Well, but I think you're speaking for a collective
Sure.
kind of support that I think most people feel is sort of like, yeah, we're not there in the actual rooms, and we're not,
Yeah.
I wouldn't know the first thing about what to do in an ICU, but I think in terms of kind of heart and soul, so to speak, you know what I mean? Kind of like a
Yeah.
supportive feeling. I think most people in our country are thinking about the medical professionals and thinking, wow, how can
Yeah.
I help? Or is there anything I can do? Or I hope they're okay. You know what I mean? I think there's like it's like a lot of well wishes or hopefulness
Yeah.
that people are doing okay.
Yeah. And I think it's going beyond um, the appreciation that people have like ordinarily, which is like, yeah,
For
I
sure.
mean, we're
For
so
sure.
lucky that at any second of the day, if your, if your mom or dad like trips down the stairs and breaks a leg, like there's always people to take care of you. And it's
Hmm.
it's one of those things I think it's easy to take for granted, but then it's gotten magnified when it's like, okay, well, all of that, because all that stuff is still happening. That's what's so crazy to me is like all of our emergency services and all of our
Yeah.
ICU care for everything else is still happening, but we just piled on top of it a worldwide pandemic.
Yeah, I can't imagine like what are the solutions for people who are getting hurt in others? I guess they have to
They're just
like
doing all of it.
triage.
Yeah, it's like it's not even as if you can say like, well, I guess we just
Not
won't
getting
deal
hurt.
with that. Yeah, we just like won't deal with this broken. Like, I mean, they're just doing this plus. That's the whole thing. I mean, it's crazy. It's amazing, really.
I think you're right. I mean, I think it's like, a lot of people compare. I was listening to Governor Cuomo compared some of this stuff to like 9/11 and how
Yeah.
there was so much admiration
Mhm.
for like the first responders after
Yeah.
9/11, right? And this, I think, a very similar situation where
Yeah.
it's not a one-time disaster. It's like an ongoing awful thing that people are dealing with. But I think there's a lot of very rightful kind of admiring of what
Yeah.
people are willing and able to do over a sustained period of time to really be helpful. The sense of I'm going to go and face something dangerous and scary for the sake of helping somebody else. You know what I mean? Like a lot of
Sure.
times, sometimes people will say things like, "Oh," I hear people say this like, "Oh, people suck," or people in general are not. You know what I mean? People say all kinds of negative things about the human race or whatever. But
Yeah.
I think this is a good example of how, in addition to some of the bad stuff, there's some
Yeah.
really generous, thoughtful, kind, hardworking abilities that people have that they're putting to good use.
But that I think that puts like don't you think that puts another weird thing on people who are doing this work, which is I don't know if the word is to like valorize, but like
Mm.
the idea of like parts of the country and parts of the world, the I think the applause and the celebration, I think it can go both ways. Like I think it can be I can imagine it would be really supportive,
Hmm.
but I think it could also be piling on another layer of
Unrealistic
expectation.
expectation. Yeah, that's
Wait,
true.
what was that? Sorry, Anton?
Unrealistic expectation.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's like, okay, like it comes back to what we were saying before about like being superhuman. Like it's a really weird and tough balance. It's like, okay, there people are celebrating and there has been like a renewed support for medical professionals, but it's like,
Hmm.
my gosh, does that mean I have to top what I've already been doing? It's like, no, no, you're all like what you're doing is more than enough. You know what I mean? But I can imagine, these are people who are overachievers to begin with. So it's like
For
you
sure.
can imagine this wish to be like uber.
Well, right. I think that going back to the question of how do you temper that, right? I mean, how do you kind of keep that in check and say, yeah, it's really nice to be celebrated and
Yeah,
to be acknowledged, but that doesn't mean that somebody should do something that would hurt them or kind of go over the top or do something that would. They still have to kind of be grounded, right? And try to think, okay, yeah, it's nice to be acknowledged, but I still have to take care of myself and sort of be thoughtful.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that circles right around to what we were saying about like having to be okay to say no to things and to say that this is too much for me and that I don't think it's not like a shirking of one's duty. I think that
For
that's
sure.
what's so complicated about it. I don't think it's you saying that I'm not up to task or it's like or that it's like too much for me. I think it's more just like this is me, it's like preserving an instrument. Like you would want to like keep your sword sharp. You'd want to keep your musical instruments polished. You'd want to take care of all that stuff. And I think the idea of just of running it all into the ground, it ultimately it's it's not as much of a service, I suppose. So in a way, I think the idea of being able to reach out for services and get support is like preservative for all of us.
Right, I think you're right, and I think that probably people who maybe have experienced sort of other very stressful situations, having that vantage point, they might say, obviously we want to do our best, but kind of you could sort of leverage it and think like, don't overdo it or don't ask too much of yourself because you're going to need that strength tomorrow or the
Yeah,
next week, or you still need to be there for your family, right? So it's kind of it's having that sort of bigger picture, I guess, where you could both do your best in the moment, but be
sure.
able to slip back and think about the situation.
Hello again. Thank you for watching the second in our episode of How to Cope with a Difficult Pandemic. There are two central ideas that I want to recap in this video. The first idea is that usually most of our self-care skills and knowing when to pause and ask for help, we learn in our families and from our mentors. And so, especially during this time, it's very important to look for trusted others, a friend, a colleague, a hospital administrator, for guidance and advice and kind of good role modeling for when it's important to stop and take care of yourself. The second thing that we reviewed in the video is that as a member of the Wayne County Medical Society, your first appointment is free with my clinic. If you're looking for help or insight or support during this difficult time when you're stressed and you have to take care of your work and your family, please don't hesitate to reach out. All the information is on our website. I hope you enjoyed the video and look forward to part 3 next week for the conversation with Dr. Rama. Thank you.